5 years. That's how long we've been together. 4 of those, we've lived under the same roof, shared the same space, laughed at the same stupid jokes, and comforted each other through bad days. We weren't just dating, we were building something real. We had talked about marriage, about a future together. I loved him, and I knew he loved me too. But there was one thing about my life that he could never quite accept: my family's traditions. Every year, my family had a tradition, a trip exclusively for blood relatives. No spouses, no fiancés, no boyfriends or girlfriends, just family. It was a rule that had existed long before I was born, one that was deeply ingrained in my family's values. My grandparents started it as a way to strengthen our bond, and my parents carried it forward. I never questioned it. To me, it was just another part of our family's way of life, like holiday gatherings or Sunday dinners. It wasn't personal, it was just how things were. But to him, it was a wall, a deliberate barrier that kept him at a distance, no matter how long we had been together. At first, he didn't say much about it. The first couple of years, he'd joke about it, calling it the annual no-boyfriend retreat. But as our relationship grew more serious, his jokes started to fade, replaced with a quiet frustration that I could feel but never fully addressed. Then this year came, and the tension finally boiled over. He asked me, just like he had every year before, if he could come with me this time. And just like always, I told him he couldn't. But this time, his reaction was different. Instead of sighing and letting it go, he got angry. "Why?" he demanded. "Why do I have to keep proving myself to your family? After 5 years, I'm still not considered part of it?" I tried to explain, to tell him it wasn't about him. It wasn't a test. It wasn't about proving anything. It was just tradition, something my family had always done. "So, if we get married," he continued, his voice laced with bitterness, "what then? Do I still get left behind every year? Will I ever actually be part of your family? Or will I always be the outsider?" I hated this conversation. I hated how I felt caught in the middle, how I was being forced to choose between the man I loved and the family that had been my whole world since the day I was born. "It's not like that," I whispered. "It's just one trip. It doesn't mean you're not important." "It does to me," he shot back. "You don't get it, do you? It's not just about the trip. It's about the fact that after all this time, I'm still not considered family, and that hurts." I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me, the pain in his voice slicing through my heart. But what was I supposed to do? Go against my family? Break a tradition that had existed for generations? I didn't have an answer. And that silence, that hesitation, was the beginning of everything falling apart. A week before the trip, things only got worse. He stopped bringing it up, but I could feel the distance growing between us. Conversations became shorter. His touch felt colder. I hated the way he looked at me, like I had betrayed him. Then, the night before I left, he finally spoke the words I never thought I'd hear from him. "If you go on this trip without me, we're done." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "What?" His jaw was clenched, his eyes dark with something I couldn't quite name. "You heard me. Either I come with you, or we're over." I felt my breath catch in my throat. "You don't mean that." "I do." His voice was unwavering. "I'm tired of feeling like I don't belong in your life. If you can't fight for me, for us, then what's the point?" I wanted to cry, to scream, to tell him that he was being unfair, that I loved him, that this trip didn't change anything between us. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. This was more than just a trip. It was a symbol. To him, it meant exclusion. To me, it meant loyalty to my family, to my roots, to the life I had always known. And so, with tears burning in my eyes and a knot in my stomach, I made my choice. I went on the trip. It started as a conversation, a simple request, the same one he made every year. But this time, when I said no, something shifted. His jaw clenched. His eyes darkened. "So, after 5 years, I'm still not good enough?" His voice was sharp, laced with something I hadn't heard before: resentment. "It's not about that," I said softly, trying to keep my voice even. "It's just how my family does things. It's tradition." "Tradition," he repeated, spitting the word like it left a bad taste in his mouth. "Right. And I'm just supposed to accept that I'll always be an outsider? That no matter what I do, your family will never truly accept me? That's not fair." I shot back, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You know my family loves you. This isn't about you personally. It's a rule they have for everyone." "But I'm not everyone," he snapped. I'm your boyfriend. Or at least, I thought I was. The air between us was thick with tension. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. But what was I supposed to do? Go against my entire family? Break a rule that had existed for generations? I can't change this, I said. Finally, my voice barely above a whisper. His silence was louder than any argument we had ever had. And then, just when I thought he would walk away, he turned back, his expression unreadable. Then I guess you're making your choice, he said. And I'm making mine. That night, he barely spoke to me. Every attempt I made to fix things was met with cold indifference. And then, the night before I left, he packed a bag. Where are you going? I asked, panic creeping into my voice. He didn't look at me as he zipped up his suitcase. Away. For how long? I don't know. I felt my stomach twist. Please, can we talk about this? We've talked, he said, finally meeting my gaze. You made it clear where your priorities are. I just need some time to think. And with that, he was gone. I sat in our apartment that night, staring at the door, half expecting him to walk back in. He didn't. I told myself it would be fine. Once I got back, we'd talk, and everything would go back to normal. But the moment I left, I felt the weight of my decision. The first night, I sent him a message. Hey, I miss you. I love you. We'll talk soon, okay? No response. The second day, I called. It rang until it went to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. By the third day, I was checking my phone every few minutes, hoping for even a single word from him. Nothing. On the fourth night, I wrote him a long message, pouring my heart out. Please, don't shut me out. I never meant to hurt you. You mean everything to me. Still nothing. And then, on the fifth day, I knew something was wrong. The silence wasn't just anger, it was finality. I packed my bags early, made up an excuse to leave the trip. I needed to fix this before it was too late. When I walked into our apartment, my worst fears were confirmed. It was empty. His clothes, his books, even the picture of us on the nightstand gone. And on the kitchen counter, a single note, a list. Every dollar he had ever spent on me in the last 5 years. Every meal, every trip, every small act of love, itemized like a bill. And underneath, a single gut-wrenching sentence, maybe Ryan can help you pay it back. I sank to the floor, the note trembling in my hands. The weight of everything crashed down on me at once. The choice I had made, the love I had lost. I had made my decision. And now, I had to live with it. I sat in the empty apartment for hours, staring at the note he had left. The list of expenses, the bitter remark about Ryan, it all felt like a slap in the face. But the worst part wasn't his anger. It was the fact that he truly believed I had betrayed him. I never cheated. I never even considered it. But in his eyes, my silence, my hesitance, my unwillingness to fight for him, it was all the same. And then there was Ryan. The name alone sent a chill down my spine. Ryan had been my first love, the guy I thought I would end up with. But life took us in different directions, and when he moved overseas for work, we both knew it was over. At least, that's what I thought. The moment I arrived at the family trip, my parents wasted no time mentioning him. Ryan's back, my mom had said casually over breakfast, stirring her coffee like she hadn't just dropped a bomb on me. He asked about you. I forced a smile. That's nice. You should talk to him, my dad added, giving me a look that made my stomach churn. You two always had something special. I wanted to scream. Instead, I swallowed my frustration and changed the subject. But my parents weren't subtle. Every time we gathered for dinner, every casual outing, somehow Ryan was there. And I hated that a small part of me still felt something when I saw him. Not love, not longing, but nostalgia. A reminder of a past that had once been filled with promise. I kept my distance, made it clear there was nothing left between us. But did that matter? My boyfriend wasn't here to see that. All he saw was me choosing my family over him. And now, with that note on the counter, I realized he thought I had chosen Ryan too. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. Panic set in. Was this really it? Had I lost him for good? I pulled up our messages, scrolling through our last conversation, trying to find anything that could fix this. But the last thing I had sent him was a message he never answered. I miss you. Please don't shut me out. I should have called him sooner. I should have fought harder. But it was too late, or so I thought. The next day, I got a call from my sister. Her voice was shaking. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Ryan, he slept with me. I felt like the ground had just disappeared beneath me." "What?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said quickly. "It was just he was drunk, and I was upset, and—" I hung up the phone. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking. My mind was racing. Ryan, the guy my parents wanted me to give another chance. The guy they kept pushing into my life. And now, he had slept with my sister. I wanted to throw up. And for the first time, I realized the truth. I had never truly been in control of my own life. My family dictated my choices. Their expectations controlled my relationships. And in trying so hard to please them, I had lost the one person who actually saw me, who actually chose me. I needed to fix this. But first, I needed to get out of here. I packed my bags and left my family's vacation early, my heart racing the entire way back home. I didn't know what I would say when I saw him, if he would even talk to me, but I had to try. I had to fix this. But when I stepped into our apartment, it was empty. Not just the eerie silence of an unoccupied space, but the kind of emptiness that screamed finality. His things were gone. The framed pictures of us that had lined the hallway were missing. Even the blanket he always kept on the couch gone. My throat tightened as I stepped into the kitchen. And then I saw it. The note. The list. The cold, calculated tally of every dollar he had ever spent on me. And at the bottom, his final words to me, "Maybe Ryan can help you pay it back." A choked sob escaped my lips as I sank onto the cold tile floor. The weight of everything crushed me at once: my parents' interference, Ryan's betrayal, my boyfriend's complete and utter devastation. I had lost everything. And the worst part? I had no one to blame but myself. I called him. Again and again. Each time it went straight to voicemail. I texted. I emailed. I even reached out to his closest friends, desperate for any sign of where he had gone. But the answer was always the same. "He doesn't want to talk to you." I refused to accept it. I had to see him. I had to explain. So I went to his workplace. The receptionist's eyes widened in surprise when she saw me, but before she could say anything, I asked, "Is he here? Please, I just need 5 minutes." She hesitated. I think it's best if you leave. Please," I begged, my voice cracking. He quit last week." My stomach dropped. "What?" She nodded sympathetically. "I don't know where he went, but he said he needed a fresh start." I staggered back, gripping the edge of the counter for support. A fresh start. He hadn't just left me. He had erased me from his life. I went back home, to my parents' house. Not because I wanted comfort, but because I wanted answers. I burst through the front door, startling my mother. "What did you do?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. She blinked. "Excuse me? Ryan? The trip. Everything. You pushed him at me, knowing I was with someone else. And now, my voice broke. He ruined my life." My father, who had been listening from the hallway, sighed and crossed his arms. "We didn't ruin anything. We were just reminding you of your options." "My options?" I laughed bitterly. "Do you even hear yourself? I lost the man I love. Because of you. Because of this obsession with tradition and control." "Darling," my mother started, but I held up a hand. "Don't." "I don't want to hear it." I turned to leave, but my father's next words stopped me cold. "Maybe it's for the best. He clearly wasn't strong enough to be part of this family." I spun around, fury rising in my chest. "Or maybe you never gave him the chance. Maybe you pushed him away so hard that he finally believed he didn't belong. And maybe, just maybe, I let you do it." Silence, heavy and suffocating. Then, without another word, I walked out. Weeks passed. Every day was a battle against regret, against the deafening quiet of my now empty apartment. I stopped checking my phone obsessively, but the ache never faded. Then, one night, I got a message from him. My heart nearly stopped as I opened it. "Meet me tomorrow. Noon, our spot." I barely slept that night. The next day, I went to the cafe where we had shared so many memories. And when I saw him sitting there, looking both familiar and so distant, my heart broke all over again. "You look good," I said hesitantly as I sat down. He didn't return the compliment. He just stared at me for a long moment before speaking. "Why are you here?" Tears burned my eyes. "Because I love you. Because I made a mistake. Because I was weak. and I let them take you away from me." His expression remained unreadable. "I needed you to fight for me, to choose me, and you didn't." "I know," I whispered, "but I'm choosing you now. If there's any part of you that's still, there isn't." The words felt like a dagger to my chest. "You hurt me," he continued, "more than you'll ever understand. And I can't go back to that." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. "So, this is it?" He nodded. "This is it." I wanted to beg, to plead, but I knew it would be useless. He had already made his decision, just like I had made mine. So I did the hardest thing I had ever done. I let him go. As I walked away, I realized something. Love wasn't just about feelings. It was about choices, and I had made all the wrong ones, and now I had to live with them. The days following our final conversation were nothing short of torture. I replayed every word he said, every look he gave me, over and over in my head. I thought about how his voice had lost all warmth, how his eyes, once so full of love, had turned cold and distant. And, worst of all, I thought about how I had done this to myself. I had let my family control me. I had let my own fears dictate my choices. And now, I had lost the one person who had ever truly seen me for who I was. But it wasn't just the heartbreak that consumed me, it was the debt. The list he had left on our kitchen counter haunted me. Every dollar he had ever spent on me, written out in painful, meticulous detail. Rent, groceries, vacations, gifts, things I had never even thought about as debts. But now they were staring me in the face, demanding to be repaid. At first, I was angry. How could he do this? How could he turn what we had into something so transactional? But the more I thought about it, the more I understood. He had given everything to me, to us, and in the end, he felt like it had all been for nothing. This wasn't about money, it was about closure. And so, I made a decision. I was going to pay him back. Every cent. Even if it killed me. I had never realized how financially dependent I had been on him until he was gone. I worked a stable job, but my income alone wasn't enough to cover our old expenses, let alone repay the massive sum he had written down. I picked up extra shifts. I stopped eating out, canceled every subscription I had, sold anything of value. I worked late into the night, barely sleeping, barely living. And yet, no matter how hard I worked, the number never seemed to go down fast enough. Desperation led me to do something I had sworn I never would. I called my parents. "I need help," I admitted, my voice shaking as I sat on my childhood bed, gripping the phone like a lifeline. "I need money." My mother didn't hesitate. "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need." But my father's voice was colder. "And what is this for?" I swallowed hard. "To pay him back." A long silence stretched between us before he finally spoke. "You can't be serious." "I am. After everything he did? After the way he left? You owe him nothing." "I do, Dad. Maybe not in the way you think, but I do. This is the only way I can make peace with it. With myself." He sighed heavily, as if the weight of my choices had personally offended him. "You're making a mistake." Maybe I was, but it was my mistake to make. I sent the first installment a week later. A simple bank transfer. No note, no explanation. Just money. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't get one. Weeks passed. More shifts, more sleepless nights, more payments. I was exhausted, running on fumes, but I kept going because this was all I had left, one last way to prove that I wasn't the selfish person he thought I was. Then, one night, my phone buzzed. A single message, his name on the screen. Stop. Just that. One word. Nothing else. I stared at it for a long time, my heart pounding. What did he mean? Stop sending money? Stop reaching out? Stop trying to fix what was already broken? I wanted to ask. I wanted to call him, to hear his voice one more time, but I didn't. Instead, I typed out 2 words and hit send. "I'm sorry." He never replied. Life moved on. Slowly, painfully, but it did. I had stopped sending payments, but I kept working, throwing myself into my job to distract from the ache in my chest. I convinced myself I was healing. Then, one afternoon, while scrolling through my phone absent-mindedly, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A picture. A familiar face. Him, smiling, happy, standing beside another woman. My breath caught in my throat as I clicked on the profile. She was beautiful, effortlessly so. They looked good together. Too good. The caption was simple. New beginnings. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. He had moved on, I shouldn't have been surprised. It had been months. He had every right to find happiness again, but knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. Tears blurred my vision as I locked my phone and tossed it onto the bed. This was the closure I had wanted, wasn't it? Proof that he was okay, that he had healed. So why did it feel like I was the only one still stuck in the past? That night, I walked through our old apartment one last time. I had held onto it for too long, hoping that maybe, just maybe, things would go back to the way they were, but they wouldn't. They never would. I packed up the last of my things, took one final look around, and left the keys on the counter. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than regret, freedom. Not from him, not from the past, but from the weight of my own mistakes. I had lost him. That was my reality, but I was still here. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to start living again. I pulled out my phone, deleted his number, and took a deep breath. It was time to move on, and this time, I meant it. Moving on wasn't a straight path. It was messy, unpredictable. Some days, I thought I had healed. Other days, the grief would come crashing over me like a tidal wave, knocking the air from my lungs. But slowly, things started to shift. I moved into a smaller apartment, a fresh space, free from the shadows of our past. I redecorated, bought plants, hung art. I had always loved but never put up because he thought it was too much. I focused on work, on friendships I had neglected. I even started therapy, a decision that felt long overdue. For the first time in years, I was confronting not just my heartbreak but myself. Why had I let my family control me? Why had I been so afraid to stand up for the person I loved? And most importantly, why had I allowed myself to become so lost in the expectations of others that I didn't even recognize my own needs? The hardest truth to swallow was this: I had been the architect of my own destruction. Not my parents, not Ryan, not even him, me. I had let fear dictate my choices, and in doing so, I had lost something I could never get back. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was walking through a bookstore, minding my own business, when I saw him. At first, I thought I was imagining it. My heart stuttered, my breath caught in my throat. He was standing just a few feet away, flipping through a book, looking just as effortlessly put together as he always had. And then, as if sensing me, he looked up. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world around us seemed to fade into the background. It had been so long since I had last seen him, but it didn't matter. I would have recognized him anywhere. He gave me a small nod. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to return it. My hands clenched around the book I was holding, my pulse hammering. I had dreamed about this moment, imagined 1,000 different scenarios for how it would go. Would he smile? Would he be angry? Would he ignore me completely? But none of those things happened. Instead, he closed his book, glanced at the woman beside him, his new girlfriend, and placed a gentle hand on her back, guiding her toward the cashier. And just like that, it was over. I stood frozen in place, watching him walk away. My heart ached, but not in the same gut-wrenching way it had before. This time, the pain was quieter, softer. A dull ache rather than a sharp stab, because this was real. It wasn't some dramatic, last-minute reunion. There were no grand gestures, no apologies that would magically fix everything. He had moved on, and for the first time, I understood that I needed to as well. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. I thought about the past, about the girl I had been, the one who had been too scared to choose love, too afraid to take risks. She wasn't me anymore. I had made mistakes, but I had learned from them. I had lost someone I loved, but I had found myself in the process. And maybe that was the lesson in all of this. Love wasn't just about finding the right person. It was about being the right person. And maybe, just maybe, someday I would be. But for now, I was enough. For the first time in a long time, I had enough. Moving on wasn't a straight path. It was messy, unpredictable. Some days, I thought I had healed. Other days, the grief would come crashing over me like a tidal wave, knocking the air from my lungs. But slowly, things started to shift. I moved into a smaller apartment, a fresh space, free from the shadows of our past. I redecorated, bought plants, hung art I had always loved but never put up because he thought it was too much. I focused on work, on friendships I had neglected. I even started therapy, a decision that felt long overdue. For the first time in years, I was confronting not just my heartbreak, but myself. Why had I let my family control me? Why had I been so afraid to stand up for the person I loved? And most importantly, why had I allowed myself to become so lost in the expectations of others that I didn't even recognize my own needs? The hardest truth to swallow was this: I had been the architect of my own destruction. Not my parents, not Ryan, not even him. Me. I had let fear dictate my choices, and in doing so, I had lost something I could never get back. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was walking through a bookstore, minding my own business, when I saw him. At first, I thought I was imagining it. My heart stuttered, my breath caught in my throat. He was standing just a few feet away, flipping through a book, looking just as effortlessly put together as he always had. And then, as if sensing me, he looked up. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world around us seemed to fade into the background. It had been so long since I had last seen him, but it didn't matter. I would have recognized him anywhere. He gave me a small nod. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to return it. My hands clenched around the book I was holding, my pulse hammering. I had dreamed about this moment, imagined 1,000 different scenarios for how it would go. Would he smile? Would he be angry? Would he ignore me completely? But none of those things happened. Instead, he closed his book, glanced at the woman beside him, his new girlfriend, and placed a gentle hand on her back, guiding her toward the cashier. And just like that, it was over. I stood frozen in place, watching him walk away. My heart ached, but not in the same gut-wrenching way it had before. This time, the pain was quieter, softer, a dull ache rather than a sharp stab, because this was real. It wasn't some dramatic, last-minute reunion. There were no grand gestures, no apologies that would magically fix everything. He had moved on, and for the first time, I understood that I needed to as well. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. I thought about the past, about the girl I had been, the one who had been too scared to choose love, too afraid to take risks. She wasn't me anymore. I had made mistakes, but I had learned from them. I had lost someone I loved, but I had found myself in the process. And maybe that was the lesson in all of this. Love wasn't just about finding the right person. It was about being the right person. And maybe, just maybe, someday I would be. But for now, I was enough. For the first time in a long time, I had enough.